Hello, good people. Today, I'll just bring my topic. It's going to be I'm going to come through the Old Testament. I'm just going to go through it briefly, and we'll go through different levels and touch topic by topic. I will give you an overview. Hopefully, you will go and read the Old Testament at your own good time. So it's going to be an overview. And because it's a big massive book, 39 books, we're going to go through it step by step. So I'll just give a quick overview. Now, the Old Testament is a collection of books which were written over a period of a long time, written by many different authors who compiled it. It has many different books, like it has history books, the law books, song books. Now let's look at how these 39, because there are 39, relates to one another. So let's dig in and see how they fit together. And always when you read this book, kindly don't pick text by text all over the place randomly, but make sure you read the whole context. And when you do this, then you'll understand the text when you pick it and have a more clear meaning of it. Now, the Bible is a library of books, as I've said before, and each book is a separate entity. And God intended us to read this book by book, because that was how he chose to give it to us. Now, again, we have to put in mind that God gave us his word in time and space. And it's important to factor in both dimensions so that we get the time at which he said or spoke that word to us through authors. And again, we have to know what place was the word given during what life situation. And you see, he was always saying something to a particular situation in time and space. And these are two important contexts we need to know when we read the Bible through. Now, I will begin with space. So here we need to remember the geographical and historical parts of this Bible. And we need to have this in mind when we read the Bible. Now, so most events took place in the Middle East. And the promised land, which was in the Middle East as well, of course, it's there in the Middle East. I'm sure some of you know your maps well enough to know what I'm talking about and what specific place geographically that was. And all the happenings in the Bible that took place was mainly along a kind of a fertile crescent. Now I'll elaborate on it just a while. What I mean by this fertile crescent, it's like a moon shape in the Middle East. The fertile crescent has a shape like a moon shape, links the large rivers at each end, the river Nile and the river Tigris and Euphrates. So it goes from river Nile and then it will go round to Tigris. Now, these rivers are on the fertile valleys, fertile deltas in the Nile Valley and the Tigris and Euphrates in the other side. If you look up the maps, it will be clear to see. So these were centers of powers at that time, in those days, the ancient world, the East powers and the West powers. Now, so the whole of the Old Testament was a struggle of powers between Egypt and the different empires that rose notably on the other side, which was Assyrian at a point and the Babylonians during a specific periods. So if you look closely at the map, you will find that in between these world powers was a promised land, so that when these powers attacked each other, they had to go through the narrow land. And by doing so, they were avoiding the black basalt road. It's basalt rock, which was sharp and hard. Even camels could not cross it. That was on the other side. So all the traffic was directed to the narrow coastal strip where actually this promised land was. Remember, there was also the Sahara Desert at the other side and the Arabian Desert where no army could cross. So if you had to feed the army, the only crossing was through the first fertile crescent. So the promised land became a crossroad. So it was right in the middle, fertile crescent. So this way is Egypt, and the promised land in the middle, and then it went across all the way to the Tigris River and Euphrates. So it was all that. Now Israel lived in the crossroad, and there was a big interference always. Remember, during Jesus' time, it was Romans who ran the Jewish people living at that crossroad, and the Romans eventually actually occupied them and ruled them. So this was a narrow corridor between these two big powers, and God gave the Jewish people that corridor at the crossroad. Europe trade routes would come down through to Arabia and through to the narrow crossroads stretching and go down. And also the road from Africa to Asia would also pass through that narrow crossing, and also narrow corridor. And the crossroad is at a point called Megiddo, at a little hill that in Hebrew it was called Armageddon. Now, a lot of historical battles have taken place at this point, and overlooking that crossroad is a village of Nazareth. The northern part of the promised land was called Galilee of the nation, and it was named this way because this is where all the nations crossed, coming down and going upwards. But down south in the hills, which was extremely Jewish, and here was Jerusalem, the center of it all. So we get to see that there was two parts of the promised land. The upper part, Galilee, the lower, isolated, the Jewish part. But it was obvious that God was planting his people at the crossroad for a purpose. Crossroad of the world. They were there to be noticed and to act as an example of the kingdom of heaven on earth, so that the world was to get a picture of how God can bless people living under his rule, and also people would see also curse that would befall them if they didn't follow his rule. And these people, when they turned rebellious, they did really turn at points. And if you read the Bible, you will find there were times when they became also very rebellious, and God had to act on them. Again, we look at the world map or Middle Eastern map, you'll find there is a huge crack running down the Earth's surface going to Africa. I presume that's the Rift Valley that it's sunken. And again, here is below is the red, it is below sea levels, and Jordan comes to this valley and is going nowhere. And even here is where there is the Red Sea. Now, the promised land is not too big, but is the size of Wales. And in this promised land, all climate of the world exists, and all the seasons of the world is found here. Snow, deserts, woodlands, rainforests, and name it all. It all exists here. So here, in this place, is where the Bible story took place. You get to know why Jesus ministered up in Galilee, and Samaria was in the middle, and you get to find why Jesus died in the south, where the Jewish occupied. This means only Jewish put Jesus to death, not all Israelites. I mean the people in Judah at that time. Now, when we backtrack, we find that the people of God are slaves in Egypt. Then they are taken away later on to Assyria. Then much later again, they will be taken to Babylonian as captives. They will be taken as captives, yeah. But you see, they are just right there in the middle of all, and would say the crossroad of the world. They're always there. Now we have to look at the dimension of the time as well. And so Old Testament covers 2,000 years of history before Christ. I'll draw your attention to Genesis chapter 1 to 11, and here we find it's a prehistoric period, which means historic to Israel. So Genesis chapter 1 to 11, we have the creation of the universe taking place. Here is the fall of man, the Garden of Eden, the flood period, and the Tower of Babel. Now, so this section of the Bible is about man and not about God's chosen people. So we see that the history of the chosen people begins 2000 before Christ. And here is a division of 5 equal parts of 500 each. And the first quarter periods are very important period. And many events are happening this period during this time. The first to take place is the election, which takes place 2,000 years back. Then there's the Exodus, this is 1,500 years back. Then there's the Empire, 1,500 years back. Then there's the exile, 500 years back. Now, during the period of election, Abram was chosen and his descendants became God's people. When we come to Exodus, we find that here Moses leads them out of Egypt. The empire time is when these people occupied the promised land and they became prosperous and peace prevailed. Now the exile period is the lowest point in their existence. Here we have Isaiah and others, priests in charge. In the beginning, they were led by patriots. Those are the forefathers, Abraham and Joseph. Then they were led by prophets. This was from Moses to Samuel. Then third period led by princesses from King Saul to Zedekiah. Fourth periods, they were led by priests, example Joshua, who came with Zerubbabel from exile right through. This leadership continues to Caiaphas during Lord's time. We see leadership became a failure in this Old Testament completely. My next in my talk is to point 2 gaps in place. A gap of 400 years each. 400 years gap when they were slaves in Egypt was a 400 gap. And the next gap was 400 years between Malachi and Matthew. And these gaps, God said nothing and did nothing. He was what we call silent. Now, there are books written within these gaps but do not cover times. When God was saying and doing something, they are not documented in the Bible. When we say the living God, it means God is active doing things. But when they say God was dead in these periods, it just means God was not longer active in the world. He existed but somewhere else. So he is not active in the world, it's just out of touch. So the books that were written during this gap between Malachi and Matthew were the Apocrypha. And these are not found in our Bible. The Catholic put them in their Bible because they find prayers to the saints and purgatory in the Apocrypha. Now again, when you look between Genesis and Exodus, there's 400 gap. It can easily be missed because most of us, we just read through and not notice it. Now, in the gap when God was silent and inactive, the Egyptians, the Indians, the Chinese culture developed. And in the other gap between Malachi and Matthew, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Buddha, Confucius, even Alexander the Great, also Julius Caesar, were very active in those times and space. So we find out when God is not busy, man is very, very busy. And this busyness of man is put down as historical events. God is not interested in man's history. So you find these historical events are never in the Bible. You look again closely at the book of Job. You will find it was most likely written during the Genesis period, Genesis 12 to 50, because Job shared some lifestyle as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, living in tents and moving from place to place. So Genesis 12 to 50 here, we find that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob leads the people. Next, we come to the quarter of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and this was during Moses' lifetime. So Moses is the author of those books, and also he was author of the previous beginning books. Now, as we continue, we find that then next books are Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. We come to the next, which is the empires, and this is history of the third quarters. And we find here the books of Samuel, the book of Kings, Chronicles, some poetic books of David, and the Psalms, Solomon's book of songs, and Proverbs, and Ecclesiastics. Then after Solomon, there is a civil war amongst these Israelites, the people of God, and the 12 tribes break up and isolate and take themselves up. The 12 tribes will break, and 10 tribes go to the upper north, they call themselves Israel, and the 2 tribes to the south, and they call themselves Judah. Now, prophets played a big role in this time of split. Example, there was Elijah and Elisha. Then we have many books from the prophets. These books were connected to exiles, others during exiles, some after exiles. They made warnings, pleading during this time. Other prophets were concerned with the rebuilding of the land and Jerusalem and even the temple. We have 2 history books in this period, and that is Daniel and Esther. Then there's the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, and even you find Ezra and Nehemiah themselves, as a person, helped to rebuild Jerusalem, to get things going after the release from Babylon. So that's an overview of Old Testament. Remember, these books were not in chronicle order, and then we find they put the bigger prophets first and the smaller prophets later on. Later on, each prophet book you will need to ask if it was written before or after or during the exile, and this gives you a better understanding of these books. Thank you very much for listening to me, and yes, I will bring another content of such as we continue and dig into the Old Testament, as now I've given you an overview of it. So we'll now go into the books. Thank you for watching, and meet you in my next video. Cheers. Bye.